everybody. I hope, as Whitney said, everybody's staying safe and healthy this year. Welcome to our first of 4 meetings for calendar year 2022. I wanted to start off before we get into the agenda by just relaying 2 thoughts that came from Josh Baker when I met with him a while ago. You know, and speaking about the advisory committee, he made 2 very important points, I thought. One was he emphasized the importance of this committee to give both him and the staff, the DASH staff, a user's perspective that they could not get any other way. And that how useful that perspective was in order to counter, probably unwitting, as he said, staff biases in planning and other related activities. So he felt it was really important for us to continue to give unvarnished, candid, prospective opinions in these meetings and elsewhere. The other thing that he made a very important point with, which I think Martin may sort of re-emphasize later in our agenda, is the role that this committee can play in DASH planning as it moves further into the spring, the normal planning season for DASH, and to have the perspectives of this committee taken into consideration as the organization moves forward. So I thought I'd feed that back to you. I thought that was very important feedback. The other perspective that I would say is that we didn't want this committee simply to be one that was faced with talking heads all the time, a series of presentations and that's it. So Whitney and I both agreed that under the category of open forum that's on this is going to be a standing agenda item for us. This gives us an opportunity to talk amongst ourselves, to raise other issues that the staff may be interested in hearing and that other committee members may be as well. So tonight will be the first opportunity to do that. Yvette had emailed me an item that I thought was useful for our open forum. So when we get to that, I'm going to call on her to lead the discussion on a particular item that she has as well. And finally, before we get going, I wanted to introduce Ed Ryder to you, since he's a new face on our screens here. Ed is the new finance director for DASH. He joined in late October, early November?
Early December, actually.
Early December, okay. Ed, maybe you just might spend like 2 or 3 minutes just telling people a little bit about your background as a way of introduction, and then we'll get into the formal agenda.
Absolutely, thank you. As mentioned, I joined DASH in early December. Very excited to join the organization. I come from a background in finance in creative agencies, but I've been a lifelong transit user and somebody who's very passionate personally about transit. I live just over the river in DC in Capitol Hill, where I also have a elected role as an advisory neighborhood commissioner. That's a hyperlocal volunteer or hyperlocal elected position that deals with planning and zoning, alcohol beverage, and transportation issues, which is actually the whole reason I ran in the first place. So very involved in that aspect, dealing with the District Department of Transportation there. But as I said, I'm very excited to join an organization like DASH and very passionate about transit.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Ed, for introducing yourself. Whitney, if you could call the roll, please.
All right, let's start with Jim Durham.
Present. I'm glad to be here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Katie Finn. Chris Fuller. Yvette Young.
Present.
Eric Van Horn.
Present. Happy New Year.
New Year. Jason Kunick. Bonnie O'Day.
Right here.
Murat Omai. Joy Scott Ressler.
Here.
Ross Simons.
Here.
And Sandy contacted me in advance to let me know he wasn't going to be able to attend this evening. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Let us proceed to the first agenda item, which is a presentation on the Transit Access and Amenities Program and ADA compliance at bus stops. I heard this presentation at the Dash board meeting early last, I should say late last year, excuse me. And it was of interest, I thought, to this group. And as a result, I reached out to Whitney and asked her if we could get a repeat presentation, sort of customized for this group. And I'm pleased that Chris Ziem, I hope I'm not butchering your name, who's the transportation chief of TES of the city of Alexandria, is here tonight to lead us through that presentation. So if I may turn that over to you, Chris.
Sure, yes. And I hate to say, but you did butcher my name. It's
Okay, please.
It's Zeman.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Everybody does, so it's not a big deal. Well, thank you. And then actually, why don't I share my screen here real quick? Make sure I'm sharing the right one. Oh, there we go. Share. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. And thank you, Mr. Simons. If you remember, I last spoke to you in October about the Alexandria Mobility Plan. The good news is council approved it, so that's our new transportation plan. So we're very excited about that, working from that as a template or as a guide to our future work. I'd also like to introduce Max DeVilliers. He's on the call, or he's in the meeting right now too. He'll be working a little bit with transit access and amenities, but I should also warn you that this is his second day here. So please be nice to him. It took a lot to hire him, so we want to keep him around. So.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. All right. So before I talk about kind of transit access and amenities and ADA access, I know the structure can be kind of confusing, so I wanted just to go show real quick how everything's related. So we have the Department of Transportation Environmental Services, and in that we have several branches. So there's the transportation branch, and then in the transportation branch, there's 3 different divisions, and I'm in the transportation planning division. And we coordinate very closely with Dash and with WMATA on a lot of things, including bus stops. And within our planning program, or within our division, we have, you can see several different programs here that touch on transit access and ADA access and amenities at bus stops and things like that. Anything from complete streets to capital projects to development review as well. So we do it all. So first off, we did a survey of every bus stop in the city. Now, to be fair, this was done in 2018, so it was done before the new Dash network, but it gives us a good idea that it gives us kind of a good starting point. And obviously we've done a lot of work since then. Now, at the time, we had about 140 bus stops that were not ADA accessible, so that's about 1 out of 5. And this takes Dash and WMATA stops into account. I know this is the Dash Advisory Committee, but I'm sure that people also ride Metro bus too. So, this, like I said, this gives us kind of a good idea of where to start from, and or just kind of a general idea of like the overall system. And we are also looking at updating this map through a capstone project this spring with graduate students, and putting these into GIS a little bit better, et cetera. So that will have more accurate information very soon. Now, some of the things that we look at and think of when we think of bus stop accessibility, and some of the issues are, curb ramps, narrow sidewalks, is parking allowed? Like up in here in Old Town, there's a lot of places where parking is allowed in bus stops. And is there a concrete pad for people in wheelchairs to safely and conveniently get on and off the bus? There are a lot of ways that TNES can address ADA issues at bus stops. So capital projects, that's kind of what people most think about when they think of making something accessible. But we also have, for example, administrative approval from the Traffic and Parking Board to remove parking at bus stops. We also have our Complete Streets program, which focuses on pedestrian and bicycle and traffic safety. And then, like I said, through redevelopment projects as well. So I'll get into a little bit more detail on each of these. So first off, the first big capital project we have here is transit access and amenities. Now this project is mainly to construct bus shelters. So we've had this project for a while. In the last round, we've already constructed a lot of bus shelters around the city. So for this round, we have about $2 million and through FY23, and in the current phase, and there's 3 phases to this project, but in the current phase, we have the first phase of this 3-phase project of this round of transit access and amenities. We selected a new bus shelter model to be off the shelf. So this will make them less expensive, they'll be easier to maintain, and they'll still look very similar to the shelters from the last round. It'll also make it easier to purchase these shelters outside of this project, so such as with a Complete Streets project, for example, or through redevelopment. We'll also have different sizes of shelters so that they fit in more locations. Because one of the things that we found is with the latest design is that they're good and they're big, but they don't always fit everywhere that we would actually like to have a bus shelter. So this gives us a little bit more flexibility. Now, phase 2 is where the engineers come in to design the actual sites where the shelters will be built. Now, I don't know if everyone can see it, but there's little red dots on this map here that show the potential locations of bus shelters that we determined based on ridership data and some other data, but mostly ridership. And then of these, 86 locations will assess them to find the most appropriate, most feasible locations, and then design about 30 to 40 locations. So this gives us a lot of flexibility to avoid delays if we find that we'd really like a shelter here, but there's not enough right of way or something, we can just go quickly to another one. So this design work will go on through 2022. And design of these sites will absolutely address ADA issues to the best that they can. And then finally, the last phase is implementation and installation. So this is an example of this bus shelter from the last round on Duke Street on the west end. So construction and installation will last between 2022 and 2025. So that's kind of the big bus shelter project that we have. In addition, we also have done several things on Mount Vernon Avenue. We've actually had 2 projects. The first was installing The first project was to build bus bulb outs to speed up buses through Del Rey, remove parking, and making sure that all the stops are accessible. So there's a picture of one of these stops at the top. Now, another project we have is an intersection safety project in Alexandria on Mount Vernon Avenue. So this will improve safety and ADA access along the whole corridor, including at bus stops. The pictures on the bottom are a couple examples of initial ideas we've had for safety, and we'll be starting this project very soon. Now, another project we have is also bicycle parking at transit. We'll be installing bike racks at about 120 bus stops throughout the city. And the goal is to improve access to transit by making, and by bicycle, but then also making sure that these stops remain accessible. Now, our Complete Streets program, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. The Complete Streets program coordinates closely with street resurfacing to upgrade most or all of the major features of the street. So here's this image here is an example. It's a very wonky engineering site plan of Commonwealth Avenue design, where we upgraded crosswalks, medians, etc. But then we also focused on improving bus stop areas in the red circles here. And a lot of our safety projects improve safety for all street users by upgrading pedestrian safety. And this increases access to bus stops as well. This might sound surprising, but believe it or not, we get a lot of community requests for safety improvements. So some of the things that we do also come from these requests. And lastly, we review every development project for opportunities to improve bus stop access. So here's an example on South Pickett Street. One shot is from 2022 and the other is from 2017. So you can see that there's, in 2017, you can see that there's a striped out bus stop, there's a concrete pad, and then there's a bench for riders. So this is a priority whenever we review development projects. So I know I kind of threw a lot at you all in a very short presentation, but are there any questions?
First of all, thank you, Chris. That was great. Appreciate that. Let me start with a question that I think maybe some of the folks on this committee might have. Do we have a good assessment from the city's perspective of the number of current and potential riders who have disabilities that might benefit from these improvements?
No. I'll just be honest and say no, we don't. But the goal is to obviously attract these potential bus riders and make it as easy for them to ride the bus as we can.
Okay, thank you. Others?
I had a question in this regard. Do these sort of projects also include things for individuals with limited eyesight, such as like Braille on the signs, or any sort of assistance in that regard?
Yeah, they definitely can. When we do Complete Streets projects, for example, we make sure that there are accessible, I forget the name of the tactiles on the curb ramps, for example. So we address them in that regard. But are you talking about like Braille, for example, on the actual bus stop sign or at the bus shelter, or?
Yeah, I guess like if it's going to be there, the Braille to assist so they know the stop ID number.
Mm-hmm. I think Dash does that already, and Martin, maybe you can weigh in.
Metro, I think, does that at a few stops. I think that's something that we need to take a look at. I don't know if we have a widespread. That's a great point that you've raised. I don't know if we have that across all of our stops. So that's something that I'll take back to the team and see if we can assess.
I would, this is Bonnie, I would have some input into that. I think a much easier and better way to do it. There's a lot of older people who have never had a chance to learn Braille. Braille is going to get covered up with snow and whatever. So one option is to put in, I think it's called a QR code, so that a person can then put their telephone, their iPhone up to the sign and then use the screen reading software, the large print software on their phone to be able to get the schedule and the bus number and all of that. So that's a really good option, I think. And I know that there's been some exploration of that already.
Yeah, that's a great point. We at many stops, I think it's at least 100, we have little displays that have a QR code that links to our schedule page, which is accessible. We also have rolled out, and this is not entirely, the project isn't done yet, but with our new Dash network, our bus stop signs have information with the stop ID. And we have the ability well, there's a couple different ways you can get real-time information with that stop ID, including with calling a phone number that will read the real-time information out loud. And there's also a text number that you can call for those that don't have smartphones that can use that as well. So there are a couple other ways to get real-time information for those that either visually or audio impaired. But the Braille is not something that we have used. But I think the QR codes could be a good idea. That's something that would be obviously a lot easier to implement than Braille.
I think it would be more useful too. Thanks. I had one more question when you're done.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So my question is, when the floor of the bus lowers, does the person in a wheelchair go down a ramp and then get on the bus floor, or does the bus floor come down to the curb and then the person gets directly on from exactly where the bus stop is?
So
am I making myself clear?
It makes sense. Yeah, and it's a great question given the discussion that Chris just provided. So the majority, I would say 90% plus, 95% plus of our fleet right now is low floor buses, which are the standard in transit. And those have it's really a ramp that kind of folds out of the door. It kind of stretches over the curb onto the sidewalk. And one of the things that we make, and it's a flat surface, so the wheelchair or the mobility device is going, staying flat. They're not having to have an incline in most cases. And in order to facilitate that, one of our design standards with all our bus stops is that they be ADA accessible, which means that they have to have a 5 by 8 foot opening, which allows enough space for the ramp to be deployed and for the person driving the mobility device to kind of come around and go up the ramp or come down the ramp off the bus with enough clearance that they're not, falling off the edge of the sidewalk or anything. So anytime we have a bus stop that we're evaluating, that's one of the top priorities that we make sure that we have is that space for that ramp to be deployed.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And the small percentage of buses in our fleet that are not low floor, we have about, I think, 4 or 5 right now that are being phased out. They're high floor. They have a lift that kind of comes out. It's the same thing. It kind of comes down over the curb, but those are much less reliable, take much longer to deploy. So those have been phased out. And I would say by the spring, we should have no more of those in our fleet. The entire fleet will be low floor.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Further questions for Chris?
Hey, Chris, I have one random question. So you were saying that for the bus shelter, you're basing off of the location on ridership data, right? And I'm just curious, after the bus fare is free, how do you collect recent ridership data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I hate to punt everything to Martin, but
No, that's definitely a Martin question. Thank you. Yeah, so we are still collecting ridership data, even though they're not putting their fare cards, tapping your smart trip card. What we're doing as a temporary measure is we still have the fare boxes on each bus, and every time a passenger boards, the bus driver has to manually press a button to indicate that the rider is boarded. That's our temporary thing that we're doing. In the long run, we are working to equip our fleet with what's called automated passenger counters, which are sensors above all the doors that kind of track as people get on and off, and they know what route the bus is on, so we can kind of track it at a very granular level. We have over half of our fleet has that equipment on it right now. In the next 4 to 6 months, the rest of the fleet will have it as well. So at that point, we would have fully equipped APC, which is really the standard for accuracy right now in terms of ridership data. So that's what we're looking for. But like I said, the manual counting is what we're using right now, and it seems to be reasonably accurate. We validated it against our APC counters on some buses. So it's accurate for now, but long run, we want to go to the automated route.
Thank you. Jim, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Ross. And thank you, Chris, for a great presentation. I have a couple of questions about staffing and prioritization to start with. For staffing, Chris, this project that you talked about in 3 phases, what part of your staff will be doing that? Is that Max in the transit portion or what? And the reason I'm asking is you made mention of complete streets a few times, and that's a staff that used to be at 1.3 people. It's down to 1 last I heard. And so while this is a great project, it's important that you have a staff that can devote the time to it to do it well. So can you just address who that will be and whether or not it's just one of 100 tasks that they're doing, or is this a primary task? Can you address the staffing piece of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so right now, I've been working with our Department of Project Implementation and or DPI. And DPI, they're kind of the engineers of the whole city, and so they've been managing this process so far. And I've just been kind of telling them what to do, and they sometimes listen and sometimes don't.
This is under your direct purview with DPI. That's great. Okay, thank you. And the next, I wanted to come back to the prioritization. You mentioned that there are about 86 locations that need to be addressed, and you would be able to do maybe 30 to 40 of them, I believe you mentioned. And one of the things you said was, some may be difficult because of right of way, and I can understand that might take them off the list. But I didn't hear what the actual prioritization would be. In other words, I think it was Yvette's question earlier, are you going to use new Dash network or ridership to prioritize? Are you going to collect the ridership data, since the 5th of September and base a prioritization at least partially on where people are getting on and off the bus? And what other factors will you use? Other than at the other end of the other extreme, I understand cost, engineering, feasibility right away might exclude some, but and let's say that excludes 10%. That other 90%, how are you going to prioritize it?
Okay, yeah, no, that's a really great question. And yeah, I definitely don't want to give the impression that like of the 86, we are prioritizing 30 or 40 of them. We are going to assess all 86 sites, and then the way we're going to decide which ones are chosen, it'll be partly on, equities, partly based on equity zones, partly based on ridership, partly based on, where we want new shelters to go and where we expect new ridership and where, a lot of Dash has moved a lot of service to. So for example, King Street, yeah, some of the places we're kind of focusing more on right now is like King Street, the West End, Alexandria, those types of places. So,
yeah, my question was prompted by the density of red dots in Old Town, when in fact the equity zones would drive you towards Alexandria and the West End. So
right.
You're going to take those equity zones and the ridership into account.
Yeah. And I think the reason there are, and here, why don't I go back to this slide? I think the reason there are so many dots in Old Town is just because there's so many bus stops. So a lot of them are along, Washington Street and King Street. And then there's a couple around Braddock, there's a couple in Carlisle. And then on the West End, there's several of them around here. And then Alexandria, there's several of them here too.
and Ross, if I could follow up with one more question. While the bulk of the project and the funding will be associated with the survey and then the engineering, et cetera, buying shelters, you mentioned the importance of other means of improving access to transit, such as removing parking. And so to what will those 86 surveys, 86 locations include, will there be a report that, the public could read, we could read, that would say, for each one of those, here are the ability of a pedestrian to cross the street and have clear visibility to get to the bus. So, almost by definition, the bus is going to be on the opposite side of the street, either coming or going, and crossing the street and having visible sight lines, the parking doesn't interfere with. But will the survey document that? This is part one of the question. And number two, will you proactively bring as many parking spaces to the parking board, recommending removal of those that are problematic? Because in my experience, there's hundreds of intersections in the city that have poor sight lines due to parking. If you can help with even a few of those as an access to transit issue, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, great. Yeah. No, when we do pick the sites, sight lines will definitely be one of the things that we'll work to improve on. I mean, we're not going to use that as a data point necessarily to choose which sites we should pick, because this is, like I said, primarily a bus shelter implementation project.
Yeah, I was going to say, since you're doing the survey, in addition to 30 or 40 bus shelter sites, can you have another 20 sites in addition to those for which you're doing a bus shelter, for which you'll recommend improved sight lines for crossing the street? Will the scope of the project include those non-bus shelter locations where you can make improvements at little to no cost?
Yeah, so that was not included in the scope for the engineers.
Might consider it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Chris? Otherwise, I want to thank him for an excellent presentation. I'm glad that you came back and presented on this particular project, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Great, yeah, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you all again.
Thank you. Okay. Welcome, Jason. Welcome, Chris, who came in a few minutes after we began, but I'm glad you were able to join us.
Sorry about that. Traffic issues. All the more reason to ride the bus.
Yes.
So our next presenter introduced himself before the two of you got online. It's our new Finance and Administration Director, Ed Ryder, who is going to talk to us a bit more on the Dash fare-free framework. I ask you to be patient with him since he's still relatively new, doesn't know all the nuances, but I'm sure Martin can help back him up as we go through it. We have this as sort of a continuing item on our agenda, in part because there's a certain degree of cynicism, I think it's fair to say, as to whether in fact the resources can be acquired to keep this fare free for all through the duration that was originally envisioned. So we're interested, as more information comes online to Dash and proposals are accepted at the state level, et cetera, where we stand. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. All right. Excuse me. As mentioned, this is I've just started just over a month ago. So if any of this information is repetitive and has been presented to this board or committee before, my apologies for any redundancy there. Today does mark 4 months since Dash went fare free. So I wanted to give a little bit of.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Is anyone else getting the the strange display for
Yes.
his
Yes.
vision to, okay. We've got the kind of the presenter view here. I'm not sure what's,
Is that
yep, there
Did
we
that fix
go.
it?
That's
All
the
right.
one. All right.
perils of using two monitors? I never know which one is
I-
going to go up. So
Same
apologies
here.
there. So as I mentioned, today does mark 4 months since Dash went fare free. So I wanted to give a little background on what considerations went into that, and then discuss the fare free framework and kind of what that entails. So just a bit of background on the fare free study. Prior to implementing the fare free framework, Alexandria did conduct a study to explore the various options to make public transit more affordable for low-income residents. The three main scenarios that were explored were free fares on all Dash, half fares for Dash and WMATA, and I believe then reduced fares just for low-income residents. Ultimately, it was decided that the most benefit came from the fare free on all Dash. It resulted in the largest overall increase in ridership, lowest cost relative to residents served, and then the highest savings due to not collecting fares. Some of the advantages there are that, as I mentioned, it has the largest overall increase. It's the easiest access to all participants. And then, just by eliminating the need for the fare collection technology, there were additional cost savings there. It's still too early to give a full, an accurate figure related to those cost savings. We've just really started that, and some of those cost savings won't be realized until further down the road. But as Martin will discuss later, we have seen an increase in ridership since implementation and the new Dash network as well. This study is online. If you wanted to review the entire study, it's at alexandria.gov/transit. You can get into the various scenarios there and kind of see all of the more in-depth points to each one of them and the advantages versus disadvantages of each. Then getting into the fare free framework. So with the implementation of fare free, the board of directors established a set of parameters that needed to be met to evaluate and guide the program as it continues on and the future of the program itself, and really to underscore the importance of us going fare free, not competing with other funding priorities and impacting service in other ways. So the key items there really are, establishing what the purpose is, and the real purpose primarily being, increase ridership overall and increase accessibility to low-income residents in Alexandria. Then looking at the program funding, the city subsidy did increase by 1.4 million to cover the first 10 months, but then outlining other sources of income that will continue to pay for the fare free funding. Then it gets into various conditions that need to be met, the need to not immediately require new equipment, and the plan to disinvest from fare collection equipment in the long run, setting forth the key steps for outreach to the community for communicating fare-free service and what needs to be done to also get input back on how the fare-free service is being received by residents. And then lastly, just establishing kind of the key performance metrics to view the long-term feasibility of continuing the fare-free service. So that's the basis of the fare-free framework. Then just looking at what will this cost, just going through fiscal year 2025. So this is based on the scenario that we ultimately did adopt, the free fares for all Dash riders. So baseline, you can see the essentially the cost of collecting the fares in general. So that is essentially what we set to save by not collecting fares. But then obviously the largest number and the one that is obviously biggest focus is the foregone fare revenue and how that goes across the next several fiscal years. Obviously, again, that being the largest number. Additionally, marketing costs as we implement the fare-free revenue and communicate that to the community will be largest up front, and then as the program becomes more established, that the costs to that do decrease a bit. So talking about what it costs, flip side of that is how it will be paid for. So some of the things that have gone into this, I already mentioned the city did increase the funding to cover the first 10 months of the fare-free service. Some of the other things that we looked at were looking at the Transit Rider Initiative Program from the Commonwealth Transportation Board. They did approve the recommendation for Alexandria to be awarded that. And so this is the award for the next several years. The total award right now is 7.1 million through FY24, and this breaks down from FY22 through 24 what the trip funding itself is. So on that last slide, you can see kind of how these numbers versus the foregone revenue, a lot of that, this does take up or make up for a lot of that. And this is just one of the funding options that is set to cover some of that. So that was really the brief overview that I had. I'm open to questions. I do apologize on some of them. I might have to lean on Martin a bit, as I'm still, learning the ropes and getting all the answers to things. Just stop sharing here. All right.
Thank you, Ed, for that overview. Jason, you want to start?
I would. I really appreciate the financial parts of this. Folks on here have heard me describe myself. I'm a bit of a hyper user of Dash. You'll see me on 36AB, 104. I'm off to the Mark Center, the Pentagon. I'm bouncing on and off Dash buses, sometimes 6 to 8 times a day. And I've been doing that for years. So that's my street cred that I give myself. So here's where I'm going with money aside, just the ridership. Here's something that I've learned, especially going to Mark Center on a daily basis, is things have changed with the fare being free. Is the high school folks, by the way, I have a high schooler at Alexandria High School. So because, Alexandria High School is right down the street from my house. It's interesting because the Mark Center bus that I'm used to taking, which throughout COVID, I was sometimes the only person on there, me and the bus driver. So I actually know quite a few of the bus drivers on a first name basis, which is nice. They're lovely folks. Even swapped recipes before. But now I jump on the bus and no joke, there's been, I can't count how many times within the last few months to where I actually can't find a seat on the bus. And it's because it's the high school kids. Now, I put myself in their shoes. Yellow bus, not so comfortable, doesn't always come at the right time. Dash bus, great customer service, lovely ride. So it's interesting because I put myself post-COVID, which, someday that'll happen. And if the 30 to 40 folks that I'm used to riding with every day for the last, 5-6 years are back on that bus, there's going to be a bit of a capacity issue if the high school folks are still on there. So it's just one of those things that you can't see it on paper, but when you ride the bus, you see these things. And that's why I just want to kind of present it to the board and to this entity. It's just saying, hey, just from a rider's perspective, that is something that is a collateral downside, or it's just something at least to entertain or keep in our, in our lens as we look over at this program. So because it happens often between the hours of, and I catch it between 5:30, between 6:30 and 9. on a daily basis, you're going to see about the same story. 104, not so much, but definitely going to the Mark Center for sure. And so I just want to pass that on to y'all.
Jason, that was a helpful comment. Chris, you have your hand up?
Actually, I wanted to kind of touch on that point too, because I've noticed an increase from high schoolers as well. But the funny thing is that before the free ridership, they could actually, for the most part, I'm pretty sure, use their school ID. It was programmed to work as a free smart trip card. So they had access to it all along, but suddenly now that they don't have to worry about the card, it's like game on.
Yeah, and those are two great points. I can chime in just a little bit. I don't have any stats on, since we're not collecting the high school smart trip, they're not tapping their high school cards anymore. We don't have exact numbers on the high school ridership. So I don't know if the high school ridership has increased as compared to pre-COVID. But I do know the program that we had free student rides. I know that program was well utilized prior to COVID. In particular instances, particularly right around the bell times, we did see high ridership on the AT9 was the old route, and the AT5 and the AT6. The AT5 in particular, we had to add a couple double-headed trips just to deal with some of the capacity problems that you're mentioning. So that's something that we can do. We have, as many of you might have seen, we have articulated 60-foot buses that are much larger and have much more capacity. So in some cases, we'll deploy those in specific places where we know that we're going to get a higher number of passengers. So those are some of the options that we can look at as we start to see more riders return.
Great, thank you, Martin. Jim, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Ross. And yeah, thank you, Edward, for the great presentation and the update. My question is about the marketing, and it's really driven by, my question is driven by the impact of COVID. So we rolled, Dash rolled this out, the city rolled this out in a great marketing campaign before the 5th, and that money for marketing is all in the current fiscal year. Question I have is there going to be another marketing campaign when we reach this point where ridership on WMATA starts to increase and COVID starts going away? In other words, I think there's still some suppressed ridership demand because people working remotely. But when people start to go back to the office, and or when WMATA starts getting back to regular service, I think it'd be important to hold a second wave, if you will, of marketing as people get back to making their transportation choices. And it's just a context of both the WMATA shutdown and the impact on COVID and then work habits. But I think a second campaign is needed, and I'm kind of bothered. That might occur this fiscal year, but we probably already programmed the marketing money for this year. Then you have the financial wherewithal, and I guess that's part of the question for Edward, to stage another pretty big marketing campaign at some undefined time, either late this year or early next fiscal year, when both WMATA comes back and people go back to working in person. Sorry for the long-winded question, but is the question clear?
Yeah, no, I think that question's clear. And I know that in the upcoming fiscal years, marketing has been budgeted. I'm not as familiar with the efforts just yet. Still kind of learning the ropes on that. So some of that I'll defer to Martin on whether that's planned down the road. I do know that obviously the next fiscal years there is marketing money, budgeted. But yeah, as far as
let me jump in here real quick with this one. Yes, there is going to be another push regionally as well. Actually, we're not going to be the only transit company that's going to be marketing for riders to come back to transit. So yes, there is definitely going to be another push. Absolutely.
And a quick comment on Jason's question is that I just want to comment that what a great problem to have that so many people are already riding the bus that when they come back, we're going to have to, increase the amount of service to accommodate them all. That was the whole intent, right?
So let me go back to the financials here for just a second, because if I do the math right, I think we're a little under $1 million short based on existing commitments of resources. So that, I think, I understand based on what you've laid out and the potential for additional revenue sources. But that assumes just the delta in terms of the rolling stock as its condition is today. Clearly, you're going to have to make other changes to the buses in terms of improvements over time. So how are you factoring that into your total budget planning? Maybe I should ask that as much to Martin as to Ed.
Yeah, I can try to answer that a little. So it sounds like you're asking about kind of the condition of the buses, the maintenance of the buses, basically. And we do factor into our annual operating budget a significant amount of money for parts, for labor that is needed for our existing buses. And then separate from that, we have a capital plan. We got operating is one part of our budget, and that's every year we know that's going to happen. Then capital is kind of the one-time purchases, the buses, facility improvements, things like that. So for our capital program, we have a plan in place to replace our buses every 12 years, which is kind of their useful life. So we have ways to maintain the buses through our annual operating budget, and then also capital to replace the buses when they need to be replaced.
So let me drill down a little bit, because when you look at your balance sheet, obviously one of the biggest drivers of your balance sheet here, and I'm thinking when you don't have revenue coming in, is obviously your labor costs. And you're about to go into a negotiation, as I understand it, with the union over your contract. So I would assume, just given the labor market as it is today, and knowing that you're already short staffed, which you've already admitted that you are, how are you going to account for what could be significant increase in labor costs over the next several years as we're trying to keep fare free, right? And still try to balance your budget, right? So that's one point. Second point, in terms of the buses too, at some point you're going to take the fare boxes out. Is that correct? And presumably there's some cost associated with removing the fare boxes as well.
Relatively minor.
Okay. But so my question is, how much pressure has to be put on city council? You have a new council, right? You have a new city manager coming in to keep the promise, if you will, that was made by the old council and the old city manager to really keep a fare-free system going over the longer term.
So the very valid concerns. I'll apologize a bit in that I've not familiarized myself with our budget quite as well to give a good solid answer to that just yet. Still kind of learning our ropes and whatnot. Obviously our budget has accounted for annual increases in wages, and obviously, as you mentioned, wages being the largest factor on an income statement. Yeah, those are questions that I need to dive into a little better to understand how we've accounted for it. I know my predecessor did build a lot of that into the long-term planning. And then your second question on how to keep the pressure on the city council is also a very valid one that I unfortunately, just being so green to this role, don't have a satisfactory answer. I don't know if Martin can elaborate a little more, having more experience with this.
Yeah, I could provide a little more background information. The good news is that with this TRIP funding that we've secured from the state, the DRPT, there is a local match requirement. They're not covering all the fares, or I should say the displaced fare revenue. They're not covering all of that. They're expecting, hey, we're going to put some skin in the game, but we expect the local municipality to also chip some funding in. So, the application for TRIP funding did go before the Transportation Commission, did go before City Council. So they are aware, city is aware that they have this commitment that they have to match the funding. And that match increases, the local match increases over the next 3 years to the point that in the 4th year, the local jurisdiction is expected to cover 100% of displaced fares. So it's really, the program is smartly designed to make sure that the localities are supporting this. This is not just some, grant that we want to apply for, and then, when we're done with it, we're going to cast it aside. It's really designed to set up a long-term fare-free program through making sure that the local municipality is putting some financial backing behind it. So we are, through that trip program and the commitment the city has made, we are fare-free through FY25. And then at that point, we're hoping that, we'll have been able to demonstrate the value of free fares such that it'll be very difficult to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube, I guess. And I should mention that, Edward mentioned this a little bit, but the cost of fare collection, especially the fare boxes, is pretty high. We were the timing worked out. We were about to have to replace all the fare boxes on our 100 buses. And the cost of that was going to be in the neighborhood of $4 million. So, we've kind of pushed that off. But if we do have to regain fare, we want to start collecting fares again in the future. That's something that we'll have to deal with. So it's almost another barrier to resuming fare collection that the city will have to grapple with. So.
Okay, thank you.
Ross, you've hit mute.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions of Edward, or should we move on to our next agenda item, which happens to be Martin?
Ross, just a quick comment on your question. I got to know 3 of the new council members pretty well in advance of installation this week. And all 3 of the new ones are very, very strong advocates. It doesn't mean that the city manager will be able to put together a balanced budget. And I don't have an answer for the city manager, but I would say for the 23, 24, and 25 fiscal year budgets, for those next 3 budgets that this council will vote on, given the opportunity, they will work very hard to keep this program. I've spoken to them all about it, those 2 new ones. And as you know, the incumbent mayor was the one who initiated it. So if there's 3 plus 1, you got 4 votes. So I think politically there's a strong support from what I've seen. I don't know what others have seen from talking to the new council members, but I'm very optimistic for at least the next 3 years. But yeah, when that grant funding goes away, it'll be a challenge.
Okay, thank you, Jim. All right, let us move on to the snapshot of the new Dash Network ridership. At our last meeting, we had some preliminary data given to us that hadn't been appropriately scrubbed at the moment. So now we have our first real look, I think, at how well the new network is working and whether Omicron is causing any difficulties in ridership in the last, 3-4 weeks, and what the projections are moving forward. So with that, I'll turn to Martin and thank Edward for his first presentation to DAC, and we hope that you'll come back and join us in the future. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Chairman Simmons. So yeah, I have a brief presentation. Actually, I have 2 items on the agenda tonight. The first is an update on how the system has been performing. As Edward mentioned, we are celebrating today the 4-month anniversary of our launch of our new network and free fares. We haven't really celebrated too much because we've been distracted by all the snow and some of our challenges in terms of having enough operators. But we do have some data that we can share in terms of the ridership. I will. And this is based on a presentation that was given to the board last month based on October ridership data. Our data is a little bit delayed. So some of the updated data I'll have for you is for November, but we don't have like the December data yet. We have some weekly data that we take a look at kind of on a week-to-week basis, but as you mentioned, it's not yet kind of validated. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information on the Omicron and how it's looked, holidays and afterwards, but I can at least give you a sense of what the first 2 to 3 months of the new network have looked like. So that's what I'll do. Okay, and let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. All right, can you guys see that, or are you looking at my desktop?
We can see it.
We see it.
Okay, perfect. Good. Okay, so there we go. So this is a lot of text, and I'll probably kind of talk more on the graphs that I have on the next couple of slides. But I think the headline is for ridership, which is kind of our most important performance metric, because it measures, how much this network is benefiting the community, how many people are finding it useful and using it on a day-to-day basis. In terms of ridership, we see really positive early signs from the new network and from free fares. We saw over 250,000 boardings in the month of October, 244,000 in November. Those were the two highest single months by a long shot for our system since COVID started. So two very strong months there. October ridership was up 50% from August, which is really strong compared to other agencies. A lot of times you'll see seasonal changes in ridership between the summer months and the fall months because you've got schools back in session. People are coming back from vacation, and then obviously throw in COVID. COVID was sort of beginning to dwindle a little bit. So there was some seasonality to it, but you can see that we were up 50%. Other agencies around the region were only up by 3 to 8% during that same period. So really good sign there that the free fares and the new network were having some effect. Excuse me. And our November ridership totals were up to 82% of pre-COVID levels from 2018, 2019, which is a huge jump. I'll show you a graph in a second that will show that further. This is a bar graph that shows our month-to-month ridership over the last 4 years. I think I'm going to make it a line graph so it's less confusing next time. But you can basically see the blue bars are FY 2019, July, August, all the way through to June. And then the green bars are FY 20. You can see we had our kind of our winter dip in the green bars. And then in March of 2020, we obviously fell off a cliff with COVID. And we kind of stayed low for all of FY 21, which is the candy cane red stripes. And then you can hopefully see the light gray stripes, which show our FY 22 numbers from July, August, September with the launch of the new network. And then into October, you can see we got up to 256,000 boardings in October of 2021 with the new network and free fares. And we're starting to get really close to where we were back in 2018, 2019. So that's kind of the main takeaway, is that you see the blue and green are kind of the standard of what we were before COVID. And you can see the striped gray bars are where we are the last couple of months with the free fares and the new network. So we're really starting to come back to closer to where we were before the pandemic. And that's further shown by this graph, which shows ridership and service levels as a percentage of pre-COVID levels. So before COVID, we were at 100% service. During COVID, we had to reduce our service levels down to 50% for a period, back up to 60%, and then back up to 80% for a while. And now we're back up to over 100% because we're able to increase service for the new network. In terms of ridership levels, at the worst point of the pandemic, we were down to about 20% of pre-COVID ridership levels. So way down. We slowly gathered steam over 2020 into 2021. But then you can see right here is where we kicked in the new network and free fares. We eclipsed 50%. I should have had data labels on here, but for the month of September, we got up to 65% of pre-COVID levels in September of this past year. October was 72%. And then, as I mentioned, November was 82%. So you can see that we're really getting a lot closer to where we were before the pandemic, in large part, I think, due to the free fares. Some other interesting ridership trends that I wanted to note. I think one of the interesting things we've seen from the pandemic is that weekday peak ridership, which accounted for a large portion of our ridership before the pandemic, has really taken the biggest hit during the pandemic. And it is still a little bit down, but we are seeing that midday ridership and weekend ridership is pretty much back to where it was before the pandemic. So really the gap between what we had before the pandemic and what we have now is really that peak ridership that hasn't quite returned yet, especially during the AM peak. We haven't seen those riders come back as strong. And I will show you some graphs that kind of show that a little bit more. So you can see here the colors. Blue is weekday ridership, orange is Saturday, gray is Sunday.
Period.
So, is there a question? No. Okay. So blue, you can see the weekday ridership from 2017, 2018, 2019 was out at close to 13,000 plus riders per weekday. We're still down around 9,000, give or take, for October, by the way. But then when you look at the Saturdays and Sundays, Saturday we are pretty close actually to what we were back in 2017, 2018, 2019. And then if you look at the Sunday data, which is the gray bars, we are actually higher than what we were back in 2017, 2018, 2019. So Sunday ridership is higher than it was before the pandemic, due in large part to the improvements that we've made on service for Sundays. So really great news there. Speaking back about the peak ridership, these bars again show ridership by time of day on weekday. The blue bar is 2017, orange 2018, 2019, 2020, yellow is the pandemic 2020, and then the blue bar shows kind of this most recent October. So you can see early AM, midday, and evening, the blue bars are pretty close to what we were back in 2017, 2018. So really that off-peak ridership has returned to the most part. The biggest fall offs are PM peak, which is still a little bit down, and AM peak, which is about half of what it normally would be. So really that's where the gap in ridership returning is occurring, which makes sense because that's when a lot of the 9-to-5 riders are riding and they're still telework. So not expected there. I have a graph here that shows ridership by routes. So you can see that line 35 is by far our strongest route, even on weekends. Line 35 is the one that runs on the west end, runs from Van Dorn up to Landmark, and then along the Beauregard corridor, Mark Center, and then Park Center, and then it jumps on 395 to Pentagon. So that is our most frequent route. That is our heavy hauler in the west end, and the ridership is following that trend. It's showing that it's a lot of people are getting a lot of use out of it. So we see that, and then you can see some other routes as well. Line 30 is our Duke Street route. That is used to be our most productive route, but it has fallen into number 2 right now. So that's an interesting trend, possibly due to the fact that WMATA has increased their service on Duke Street a little bit, so we could be losing a few riders to Metro. And I think I have maybe 2 or 3 more slides here. This is kind of another graph that shows the ridership by route. The frequent all-day routes, the ones that run every 15 minutes or better all day, 7 days a week, are the red, shown in red. So lines 31, 35, and 36. You can see those account for, I think, I did the math a while, I think it's over 50% of our, well over 50% of our total ridership. Compare that with, our peak, our weekday only routes, the 103, 102, 103, 104. Those account for less than 5% of our ridership. So really, those frequent all-day routes, those core routes, are really driving our ridership right now. And shifting away from ridership for just a moment, there's a really interesting tool that's available. The link is right here. It's called Metro Hero, DC Metro Hero. It's a third-party independent website that tracks real-time information and service reliability for transit agencies around the DC area. And we're very proud that we have a really good real-time program, really good intelligent transportation system program that tracks all of our data. This particular graph is showing on-time performance, which is a measure of our scheduling and how well we're staying on schedule. If we're telling a passenger that we're going to arrive at a certain time, we're arriving very close to that time. So you can see from this graph that we are shown in blue, dashes blue. The other agencies are shown in the other colors. We have throughout the entire year have been above 90% on-time performance, which is really good. I think the industry standard is usually about 85%. So we're really proud of how we're doing there. And a similar measure, headway adherence. This measures bus bunching. Our buses, if they're supposed to come every 30 minutes, are they coming every 30 minutes-ish, or are they coming every 40 minutes or every 25 minutes? So we're also doing pretty well on this as well. Roughly 85% of our trips are bunched or are spaced appropriately. We did have a data issue in September, which is why we had this dip here. So that wasn't necessarily an indication that we were not spacing our buses out. But it just was a data issue with our real-time information. So I'll stop there. That was a lot to digest. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Martin. That was great presentation. Anyone on the committee? Questions for Martin?
I have a quick comment. Actually, I have a thank you for Martin. When I'm not on the dash, I'm probably jumping on DC Metro. DC Metro is almost always late. And there's been a handful of times in the last few months, or actually the last few weeks, that they driven right past me at the bus stop. Never happens on dash. You guys are always on time. If you aren't, it's like within seconds, not minutes. And sometimes DC Metro just cancels a line and you have no idea why. So I just want to say thank you. It's one of the most reliable services, and it's continues to be so even in these challenging times. So thank you.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you, Jason. But on behalf of really our schedulers and our operations team, they're the ones that really make that happen. So thank you.
And this is Joy Scott Rester, and I have to second that thank you. I've been taking Dash for years, and it never ceases to amaze me, the on time performance. I mean, it's amazing. You know, from New York City, and it far exceeds, the timeliness of the New York City public transportation system. So I second that. Thank you. Amazing. I love the Dash bus.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Other questions on this topic, which will probably be a recurring topic of our group. Otherwise, I would suggest that Martin moves on to the next one, which is the FY23 Transit Development Plan
I
review.
think Jim has a question, Ross, before we
Okay,
move
sorry,
on.
Jim.
That's all right. And Martin maybe answered it in the next one, in which case I'll hold it. You're in the middle of working with city staff on the budget for next year. Are you going to discuss this next thing of the plan to get the Duke Street high frequency all day service? If so, I'll just wait for the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I can talk about that a little bit in the next item. Definitely. That's a great segue, actually. So I did take, apologies, I did take a little bit of liberty on this. It is about the FY23 Transit Development Plan, which is our big annual service plan and outreach process that we do every spring. But I did also want to highlight one other outreach that we'll be doing, since I thought it might be of interest to the group. So I'll start with that. So for those that have been tuning into our board meetings, you'll know that Dash is moving in the direction of federalization, which would allow us to receive funding from the Federal Transit Administration, which is something that we are not currently able to do. The city is able to, but Dash is not able to. Historically, we haven't really done that because there hasn't been a really good reason to, but there's been in recent years an infusion of funding into capital programs for electric buses, for example, is a big one that we would like to see if we can take advantage of, given our objectives to create a more sustainable fleet. So in the interest of trying to make ourselves eligible for those types of opportunities and others, we are working with the city and with FTA to establish ourselves as eligible recipients. And as part of that process, we have a lot of different requirements we have to fulfill, one of which is our Title VI program. We always pride ourselves in our focus on equity and making sure that we're providing good service to all parts of the community. And that's what Title VI ensures for agencies, is making sure that they're providing equitable service to low-income members of the community and other vulnerable parts of the community. So as part of all that, we need to develop and formalize a set of policies that will help us monitor and make sure that we're making decisions that are aligned with that equity lens. And those are our Title VI service standards and policies. So we will be developing those policies in the next couple of weeks. And our plan is that hopefully by February, we'll be able to take those to the board for an initial presentation to them. We'll follow that up with some outreach to the community that they can provide input on how we are assessing our system as it relates to equity. What are our service standards as it relates to equity? There's a kind of a number of different policies that we have to put in place related to how we evaluate service changes in Title VI. So those policies need to be vetted through a public outreach process, and we'll be doing that in February, March. So you can look forward to hearing more about that and attending the meetings or providing feedback. So just wanted to let folks know about that. Any questions? I know that's kind of a little bit of an abstract topic, not as concrete as some of the other stuff we cover, but let me know if you have any questions. Okay, and hopefully by March, the board will be able to adopt those policies, and that will put us in a good position for FTA compliance. Okay, so the actual agenda item that probably is of a little more interest right now is the FY23 Transit Development Plan, the TDP, and our budget. So just a quick update on that process. Every year, we work with the city in the fall and into the winter to kind of identify our budget priorities. And then by February, the city comes back to us with a target budget number, which is what we use to create our budget and our service plans for the following fiscal year. In this case, we're talking about FY23, which starts in July of 2022. So they provide us the target that we have to hit in February, and then we in March typically present our TDP, our Transit Development Plan, to our board of directors. That TDP is designed to outline proposed service improvements, changes, any fare changes, which probably won't be as relevant now, but propose those to the board along with our budget. We then go through what amounts to about a 2-month public outreach process, which includes a public hearing, usually at our April board meeting. And then the board takes the final TDP, which may have been revised based on feedback, takes the final TDP under consideration in May, and usually, hopefully, adopts it at that point. So that's the process that we go through, and of course, we'll be looking for this group to provide input. I think the timing works out. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the next meeting of this group is the first week of April. Is that correct?
It's April 6th. Yes.
Okay, great. So that'll work out quite well. I think that'll actually be the week before we have our public hearing at the board meeting. So timing is good. So I'm sure we'll be covering that with you all at the next meeting. So I can give you just a kind of a high level preview. I can't really provide too much information because we don't know what the budget target is going to be. And we are already asking for significant increases aside from service improvements, just based on labor costs, like we mentioned, and based on some of the other things that have come out of the new network. But if we are able to increase our service, we have a couple priorities. One is going to be ensuring service reliability, which means providing some extra stage and standby buses that can be deployed as needed as service if service is disrupted. And then we have a couple other improvements that we're looking at that would involve improving our connections between east and west side of town along Duke Street. One of the things that Jim, you were mentioning are improvements to our Duke Street corridor, and then also on our King Street corridor. Currently, some of the trips turn back at King Street instead of going into Old Town. So on the 30 and the 31, which are King Street and Duke Street routes, every other trip during some times of the day will stop at King Street Metro and turn back around instead of continuing to Old Town. And that was due to budget constraints. So that's one of the things that we're trying to improve. We have some other things that we've asked the city, including upgrading Duke Street to a frequent all-day corridor. The price tag for that is pretty significant, but we have included that request in what we've submitted to the city. So we will see what they come back with and what our target is, and that will kind of dictate what improvements we're able to put forth for our TDP. But that's kind of just in a nutshell what we're looking at with the TDP process for FY23. I'm happy to take any questions if you guys have any.
The obvious first question to ask you, Martin, is how best we as a advisory committee can help give the input, and in what manner would be most useful to you and to staff. Is it in the form of having first a preliminary discussion and then a formal document to you, or how would you like to best receive the most useful information?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think what I haven't included on this slide is I've included the DASH process. I haven't included the city process, which is equally important since they are effectively controlling the purse strings. So we'll probably any sort of feedback that you can provide to the city, to city council through their budget process, certainly that would be helpful. If once we have our public hearing and once we're soliciting our feedback, any sort of letter or input that you can provide to our board as well, that would be really, I think that would be a really powerful way to make your voice heard. So that as we get closer to the spring, I think we should keep in touch, and we can help provide information on ways that you can provide feedback as a group or individually.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Martin. I have a follow-up question, building off of Ross's question. So do we? So I don't think we have access to see the budget from the DASH side. So it's the input that we give based on the PowerPoint or reports that you pulled. or if there's any priority, budget priorities that we can work off of.
Yeah, so we've, I think it was back in December, we kind of laid out our supplemental requests to our board during that board meeting, which identified kind of what we thought were the biggest needs for Dash. And those were what was presented to the city. So that part of the process has already happened. But what hasn't happened is in March and April, we're going to be presenting, our proposed service plan and TDP to the board. And that's where we're expecting to get some feedback in terms of what service improvements we're proposing, and if the public thinks that those will be appropriate or not. So that's really where we would get feedback for Dash. In terms of if you were looking to advocate for more investment in Dash, the city council and their process, they have an add delete process for their budget that goes on. I wish I knew it off the top of my head. I think it's in March and April. But that's a good place to advocate if we're looking to increase the amount that's invested in Dash instead of just rearranging how we spend that money on our side.
Yeah, that makes sense. And additionally, I don't know if all of the COVID related expenses like PPE or testing, things like that, is it coming off of maybe FEMA's funding or the city's funding, or Dash is eating up the cost?
Yeah, we've a lot of the COVID funding is eligible for reimbursement through both state and federal programs. The city has been awarded a large amount of funding through the federal grant programs, stimulus program, not the stimulus program. I'm blanking on the name of them. Perhaps others would recall it, but there's been a couple large infusions of COVID related funding from federal and state level. So Dash is not having to incur additional expenses for those types of things right now.
Other questions for Martin from the committee? Otherwise, thank you, Martin. We hope to hear from you in the interim between now and April with whatever documents you think are useful and other considerations that can help us help Dash.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're now going to move on to the new piece of our agenda, which is the open forum. This was, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, and for those who weren't on the call at the beginning, let me just repeat it very briefly, was an idea that I discussed with Whitney, that we should have some time at each meeting for the committee to talk amongst itself, so it isn't completely just talking heads giving useful information to us, but the committee itself can interact more as well. And to be able to bring up any particular items that we think would be useful for not only for us as a committee to be more efficient and helpful to Dash, but also items that we think for the future Dash might consider. So we do have one item right off the bat for tonight, which is something that Yvette wrote me about when I solicited ideas for this committee meeting. And it really comes out to the question of how do we better communicate, not only amongst ourselves, but with other entities in the city and the mechanisms that we can use. So I'd like to have Yvette present just briefly her idea and then have a discussion amongst the committee. So I'll turn that over to you, Yvette. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. So I have the idea of maybe creating an email address that ends with dash.com or what the official email that you use, just for the advisory committee. And maybe the chair or vice chair can rotate to monitor the inbox or send emails on behalf of the committee. And a few reasons on top of my head would be, so currently if Whitney is sending emails to all the committee members, she's sending us to our personal email, but she could also copy the Dash serve as a historical archive communication that internally went on or externally going to other organizations. Another use will be just like Martin said, if we were to advocate for more investment from the city to Dash, that email will serve as an official communication channel for that advocacy effort. Or if we're communicating with other, regional based organizations, that would be a good place to start. And I remember when I first applied to join the advisory committee, I tried to call the landlines of, I think, Josh and maybe Whitney. So it will serve as a good recruitment tools for interested person to inquire and talk about how to contribute to Dash's advisory effort. So yeah, these are a few on top of my head, a few benefits I could think of for creating an email address like that. And welcome everybody's input.
Thank you, Yvette. Comments? Whitney, you said you were going to look into the technical piece of this. Have you followed up on that yet? And is it feasible to do what Yvette is suggesting?
So it is feasible to do it. The only thing that I need to double check is, and maybe Martin, you can help me out with this, but I just need to make sure that it's okay to create an official email for the committee that goes through the city, because that's what our emails go through. So that's the piece that I need to double check. But it is feasible to create the email.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's going to be a question for our IT manager, who's the one who manages the IT stuff. I'm thinking receiving the emails and having them, forwarded to your personal emails would probably be okay. I'm not sure about if an email were sent out from the address to someone else with an Alexandria VA or Dash Bus email. That part might be a little more of a question mark, but it seems like this is a good idea, at least for kind of soliciting input and, at least having one email address. We use this all the time for our various departments over here at Dash, planning email or, communications email list. So it seems like a great idea.
Can I raise one sort of procedural question, which I realized I should have asked much earlier in this process, which is right now we are essentially an informal committee of Dash. I mean, it's not there's a formal letter, but we're not like the equivalent of a city commission or committee per se. By getting the email address that is proposed, are we going to be subject to city open access issues, to having to archive certain things as required by other city commissions? Because at the moment, one of the beauties of this committee is we're kind of not bound by the city rules in one sense. I mean, that's both a positive and a negative, I guess I could argue. But the question becomes one of what are the kind of legal requirements that might be placed upon the individual committee members and the committee itself if we were to go in this direction. I think it would be useful maybe to get an opinion of that before we finalize any decision, so we know what we're dealing with. But I'm open to other views.
Ross, I kind of second your angle on that, and just being a former inspector general on the DoD side, I mean, that would probably open us up for a FOIA, FOIA requests. So just one thing to be mindful of. But I appreciate reaching out to the lawyer and having feedback from them for sure, an opinion, because FOIA requests can really bog down a very small committee. Part-time committee at that.
Yeah, Chris, Eric, Jim, any of you have a particular view that you want to express?
I'd agree that it would be good to kind of know the particulars of like what are the ramifications of having a part-time committee have a more official email. So I'm in agreement with you, Ross and Jason.
Joyce Scott, do you have a particular view?
No, but I think you raised an interesting point, and that's something to consider. But no, I'm fine with it or without it if it remains as is. But.
Eric, what's your view?
Yeah, I'm fine either way as well. I will say, like, I think it definitely would solve some of the things that Yvette raised. I think there's no question about that. So on those grounds alone, I'm for, but I also understand there are some hurdles involved.
Jim?
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, Yvette, for bringing it up. Yeah, I thought Yvette made some good points, and there's some real pluses. So if it's technically doable and it's doable without incurring too many limitations on the committee's ability to have conversations, that'd be great. It is interesting, the point you brought up, because we are an informal group. We do communicate, more than two at a time. So we're not currently subject to the sunshine laws. And it would be interesting to find out if just the use of an email address would change that. I would think our charter is such that it would stand alone and wouldn't change with just the email. That would be my hope in order to move forward with this. So it's a good point. It needs to be looked into. But fingers crossed that just adding an email doesn't change the character of the group. Yeah, that's all I have.
Right. I think Yvette has an excellent idea here. I just want to, if you will, dot the i's and cross the t's to make sure there isn't some unexpected hurdle that we all face. So what's the timeline, Martin and Whitney, to just sort of run this down? Can we find out about this before our April meeting? Well, before our April meeting, and establish this email by maybe some sort of quick email vote, if assuming this doesn't pose any difficulties.
I don't imagine this will be a very time-consuming process. I will reach out to our attorney to find out the particulars about adding a designated group email and what ramifications that could possibly have, and get back to the group as soon as I can. So I'll actually send that email this week.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Yvette, for bringing this to our attention. This is great. So I want to go back to Martin's last presentation here for just a second with the group, which is, and it underscores what Josh has said to me now on a couple of different occasions about the importance of this group vis-a-vis the planning process. So I'd like to get a better sense from the group of the kinds of information, both in terms of detail and frequency, that you would like to receive, both from Dash per se for their process, but maybe also from the city for their process as well, to provide the best perspectives we can as a committee moving forward. So that's an open question. Feel free to comment.
I'll just jump right in and break any silence. Ross, I was, actually the whole board, I was thinking about this. Okay, what is my participation? What's the value that I bring to this meeting, other than I ride Dash a lot, and I have some observations. Those are all great, but if you ride Dash, you have the same opinion I do. So at the end of the day, what are our goals as a team, as an organization? I think, I love to strive for goals, not saying everybody has to look through my lens, but, from one meeting to the next, what would we like to achieve? I love how you brought up a letter from Martin. You know, what does that letter look like? What do we want it to contain? That's a great goal. I like that. You know, and working towards that. Also, it also pulls me into doing a little bit of work between meetings and participating a little bit more because I know it's going towards, you know, something useful. So, so I appreciate that. And where I'm going with this is I'm not saying maybe we have to have, you know, agenda items that are just agenda items, but goals in those agenda items. And if, you know, if everybody supports those goals. So now what those goals look like, I don't know, but that's something I'd like to turn over to the group.
Great, thank you, Jason.
I think that's a good point, and especially I know one of the big goals for me joining this group is that since I'm a special education teacher, a lot of this is the accessibility aspect. So really getting that information on the accessibility of bus stops, like that was one of my favorite things to hear about from being a part of this forum, because I know that we're doing something that's helping those students and those individuals that for a lot of them, they won't have a driver's license. And it's good to, one of the things I preach a lot is just really being able to access your community.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Mhm.
Eric, Joyce Scott? Yvette?
Yep, I'm here. I don't have anything more.
Okay.
Very beneficial meeting. Very informative.
I like the idea of like going to the new year with a purpose, right? And then how do we take other people's welfare into account in our the small internal group that we have? So I see a good objective for this year will be good to have is that, so each of us has different backgrounds and we come from different contexts and we have different relationship with Dash Bus. Maybe we could explore the individual aspect of the committee members and see what our what we would like to accomplish this year, and incorporate that to either the open forum or recurrent basis in the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yes, thank you. And this goes back to part of the committee's purpose, and we warmed up as the New Dash Network was been rolled out, and I thought it was a broader purpose, not just associated with the New Dash Network, but part of what we should do is be part of the conduit to the community to disseminate information. Is that still part of our overall role? And so I suppose in a perfect world, I'd do a better job of either attending the.
Oh, Jim, you muted yourself.
Thank you. Sorry, bumped something there. Yeah, so in a perfect world, I'd attend the Dash board meetings, and I do try and do that. But I will tell you, a monthly summary of, hey, here's some highlights, even a one-pager of here are the highlights. What I learned tonight that I should have learned in December is that the Dash's proposal to the city and its priorities for funding included X, Y, and Z. So now I know to go back and read that. That would have been helpful to have gotten in a one-page summary. So maybe there's a one-page summary after each board meeting of here are the highlights of that board meeting, or here's what else is going on with Dash, and just make sure that because I see those things as important in our role as keeping the community informed. I have some pretty good social networks, and boy, I could have energized a large part of the community in December to be doing something with that information, if you will, back in December. We can still do that. I can still do that now on the 5th of January and the 6th of January. But that's what I'm thinking is that we take on this, proactive role of informing the community of things that we're privy to. And again, it's public knowledge if it's been presented to the board, but helping us to do that, maybe a one-page summary. I just throw that out for other members of the committee to think about if you see that as an important part of a role, and that would help us in that role.
Thank you, Jim. I mean, I look at last year sort of as a trial run. We actually didn't have we were just sort of getting organized. We only had 2 meetings, then we had COVID. We have never been able to meet in person yet. which is a little frustrating, and being able to do sort of a lot of in-person events as a committee. So I sort of view this year as the maturation year of this committee. And I don't want to overburden people that are on this group, but we're here for a purpose. I think we all volunteered because we have a desire to assist Dash and make it better and offer some interesting insights. So I want to think about the best mechanisms. I'm not necessarily saying we can solve that tonight. I think we've had some interesting ideas already, but I'd like us to think about that. And I do like Jason's idea of being a little more active in between meetings. We have that opportunity to do that if we choose. And, I'm happy to be a conduit for information that people have or questions they want to pass to other committee members, or we can do it as a group. It doesn't matter to me. But I do think that's at least something for us to consider. And, we have 4 meetings this year. I think thinking about them in a more strategic sense is probably a very good idea, as several people have recommended. So I just sort of want to leave it at that for the moment, unless anybody else wants to offer, a couple of other small closing ideas for what we should be doing. If not, I'm going to suggest that we see whether we have any other new business that anybody wants to bring forth, other than we've just discussed.
I do have one item that I'd like to bring to the group, but I want to give the committee members a chance to bring up anything they'd like to discuss first.
Not hearing anything. Whitney, you're on.
All right, so Ross and I did have a conversation, and in a meeting prior, I believe it was the October meeting, if I'm not mistaken, I did a very quick run through of our new website mock-ups. We are at a place where we're just about ready to share the new website with you all to get your feedback. So the way this process is actually going to work is I'm going to send this to our senior management team first for their review, thoughts, feedback. And then the next step will be to actually send it to you all. Because what I want to make sure that we're doing is, right, the purpose of this group is to make sure that we're getting your feedback on the projects that we're actively completing. So just to give you a little background, I am going to share my screen. Bear with me for just a moment. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure I'm not doing is walking you all through the website, because one of the things that I really want to get out of this process is the usability of the website and the ability for you all to be able to find things on the website without the guidance, because most people won't have that guidance. But I do want to just, again, give you a quick recap of what at least the homepage of the website looks like before you start clicking through. Hopefully this is very close to what we provided, to what I provided you all initially. I've actually been clicking through today. Give me a second to get back to the home page. And there are also some pages that do not yet exist that will exist by the time this gets into your hands. However, this is, as soon as it loads, the home page of the new website. The goal was to provide menu options that make it easier for passengers to find the information that they're looking for. If you recall, on the current website, everything is pretty much under either About Us or Ride Dash. So you really have to dig through to try and find what it is that you're actually looking for. And then one of the other things that we wanted to make sure we did was move the most important information to passengers above the fold. And what I mean by above the fold is not needing to scroll down the page to find what's most important, which includes service alerts. So what I'm looking for from this group is your feedback on the usability, on the ability to find the information that's most important to you, and any information that you believe we have left off that we need to include. My expectation is that I will have this link to you, depending on how quickly I get feedback from our senior management team by next week. So I do not by any means plan on waiting to send this until our next actual meeting. I'll send the link to the group. I'll provide a bit of an overview like I did this evening, and recap what it is that I'm looking for from you all to help us to make sure that we're providing the best information we can. And then your feedback is going to be vital at this stage. So please, please, please take an hour, hour and a half, click through, and please let me know, give me your thoughts. Brutal as they may need to be, it will help us to make this better, and that's what's most important.
That's great, Whitney. Would you also be sure that when you send it out to give a deadline date that you want to get comments by?
Yes.
So that we just don't miss it?
Absolutely.
Whitney, do we have a link to the old website to compare it with the pilot website?
I can send that along with let me make a note of that. I will send that along with the website, with the new link for the new website as well.
Jason, did you have a comment? I thought I saw your hand up. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just giving a thumbs up. I thought it's great. Can't wait to jump into it.
Got it. Great. All right. Is there any other business that needs to be brought forth at this particular meeting? Otherwise, I'll remind the committee our next meeting is April 6th, 5:30, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Sorry, I
Second.
couldn't quite see who moved.
Jim
That's
moved.
Jim.
I'll second it.
I second.
Okay. Several seconds. Okay. Everybody be safe and healthy, and we'll continue to circulate ideas for more activity amongst this group in the coming months. And I very much appreciate your participation as always. And thanks again to Whitney and to the staff of DASH for their excellent presentations. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
See you soon.
New Year,
Chris?
good night.
Take care, everybody. Yeah, Joy?
Yes, could you hold on a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes.
Oh, okay, so Joy, let me see if I can make you the host. And
Okay.
that way I can let you guys talk.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Joy, I think I know what you're talking about. I happened to see the LinkedIn message.
Yes. Yes.
All right, Joy, you should now be the host.
Okay, great.
So I'm gonna head out, and whenever you're ready, just close it out and it'll be good to go.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You too. Yes, Chris, it was fortuitous you mentioned you're a special ed teacher, and I was like, oh my goodness, because I am acquisitions editor for Times 10 Publications. I'm going to put my video on, an education publisher.
Mhm.
And we have our most popular our books are our Hack Learning series. We have like Hacking School Discipline, which is our runaway bestseller, which we're going to revise. And we have been looking for an author to, someone to serve as an author of a book for hacking special education. So I just wanted to know if you'd be interested or interested in that, or writing, or if you've written, or if there's anything that you would consider.
I have not written before. I would be interested. Whenever you say hacking special education, like kind of what were you looking for? Like,
well, I would send you information on, there's a format, there's components, the hack, which is the problem, what you can, the pushback that you might get, because there's generally pushback, what you can do today, what you can do tomorrow, and there's a hack in action. So there are several components to the Hack Learning series books, and I have everything detailed, that it's something that it appeals to a lot of people. I mean, we have 28 books in the Hack Learning series. Hacking graphic novels is our latest one. Hacking project-based learning, hacking school discipline, hacking, oh my goodness, there's so many of them. I have my list here. But like I said, we're interested in doing one on special education. And another one we're looking for an author for is one on teaching English language learners.
Okay.
So those two, because those are topics that are of interest to a large number of people, special ed. And like I said, if you're not interested, that's perfectly fine. But I just figured I'd follow up with you because, you mentioned that you were a special education teacher. So
yeah, I think I'd be interested as far as like, would the audience be, is it for teachers? Is it for parents? Like, what would the audience be?
that's for teachers.
For teachers.
That would
Okay.
be for teachers.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in that. I don't know if you're looking for special education in general, but I know one thing that I've been working on is like looking at transition planning for students as they exit out of high school and go on to employment, independent living, training, things like that.
That's interesting.
I don't know if that's too niche for compared to what you normally look for in these books, but
yeah, I mean, that would be rather niche. I mean, we want something, for teachers, who are teachers of special education students. So, because we want something that's going to appeal to the largest audience possible. And I mean, what you're doing in terms of transitioning is definitely interesting, but yes, it would be niche. And, if you're not interested, it's perfectly fine, totally understandable, but I just wanted to talk to you about it because, I didn't want to just reach out to you because I have your email address because we're on the desk. I don't want to cross any lines there. So
no, it's okay. So I'm interested, but I'm concerned about the time commitment if you guys have like a set deadline and I can't meet it. So I guess
it would be a year. At this point, we're looking for books for 2023 and 2024.
Okay.
We're interested in publishing 10 impactful books a year. So we receive lots of proposals and we decline a lot because we don't just want to just put anything out there.
Yes.
So it's got to be something that's topical, that would be of interest to a large number of people and impactful.
Okay.
Our mission is that educators have problems and they deserve practical solutions. That's our mission. And the Hack Learning series books really do, it really fulfills that mission. They're just wildly successful.
Okay.
So I will, is it okay if I send you information? I have your email address from the list, and I will tomorrow send you, the hack format and our pitch guidelines if you're interested in, pitching something. Like I said, at this point, we're looking for books that would be published in 2023 and 2024. And so you would have like a year to write a manuscript. And that's the minimum that I like to give new authors, people who have not written at least a year.
Okay.
So, but yeah, so I will send you that tomorrow, and I don't want to take up any more of your time because our meeting was long this evening. So thank you for staying on with me, and I just wanted to touch base with you. Like I said, I didn't want to just send you something. And like,
no, I appreciate it really, and it'll be good. Like you said, it'll be good to kind of look at the process, see what the format is for these sort of series, so I have an idea if it's a good fit for me and if I'm a good fit for you.
Right. Okay, so you'll hear from me tomorrow.
All right, great.
Okay, thanks so much. Have a good night.
Of course, you too, Joy. Take care.
Bye. Oops, let me see if I can end. Yes. Ooh.